Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of how Chuck Norris dominated the 1980s. In part 1, in the previous installment, linked below, or you could check the link at the end of this video, I talked about how Chuck Norris started off the decade with a bang, started in 1980 with The Octagon, and in 1983 he had Lone Wolf McQuade. So in the span of 3 years, he took down a terrorist organization, took down a drug trafficking ring, took down a scientifically altered indestructible serial killer, and he took down David Carradine. But that was just the warm-up of what Chuck Norris would accomplish during the 1980s. So now we're in 1984 with Missing in Action. The movie revolves around an unauthorized rescue of POWs who were trapped in Vietnam after the war. If that sounds like the plot from Rambo First Blood Part 2, Hollywood lore has it that Missing in Action was inspired by James Cameron's treatment of the former, as well as the eventual script that he co-wrote with Sylvester Stallone. Missing in Action and its first sequel were rushed to theaters before Rambo 2 came out, but the similarities between the films were not lost on the movie fans, and even though it came out first, many people see it as a Rambo ripoff. While both films are quintessential 1980s action movies featuring Vietnam War veterans rescuing POWs, Rambo First Blood Part 2 is the more explosive, spectacle-driven film. With a deeper exploration of the psychological consequences of war, in contrast, Missing in Action is more straightforward, focusing on patriotism and justice, and it offers a slightly more grounded approach to its action. Both films had a lasting impact on the action genre and helped to define their respective stars, Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone, as icons of 1980s action cinema. In Missing in Action, Norris plays Colonel James Braddock, an American officer who spent 7 years in North Vietnamese POW camp, then escaped 10 years ago. Braddock accompanies a government investigation team that goes to Ho Chi Minh City to check out reports of Americans still held prisoner. Braddock gets the evidence and travels back to Thailand, where he meets Tuck, an old army buddy turned black market kingpin. Together, they launch a mission deep into the jungle to free American POWs from General Tran, played by James Hong.
Hot right! Hot right!
Vietnam is widely known as the war that America didn't win, and Missing in Action tries to rectify that by having Braddock face impossible odds to rescue at least some of the POWs who were left behind. That gives America a win it never had in reality, and Rambo 2 essentially did the same thing, a year later as mentioned.
Sir, do we get to win this time?
This time it's up to you.
That does remind me, I remember growing up on army bases back in that era when those films came out, and you'd always see those POW MIA flags, prisoner of war, Missing in Action. And I feel like films like Rambo 2 especially, and also Missing in Action, was great for the soldiers to see. It was almost like cathartic in a way when they would watch that film.
You know there's more men out there. You know where they are. Find them.
These films are like fantasy, and to at least see in film what many of them wish they could do, or have someone else do, something that would have taken place, it was nice. It resonated with American audiences, civilians alike, and that's one reason why these movies were so successful.
Mission accomplished.
Following Missing in Action would come the sequel, that is really the prequel, Missing in Action 2, The Beginning. The first two Missing in Action film movies were filmed back-to-back, which is how they were both able to beat Rambo First Blood Part 2 to theaters. The second film, Missing in Action 2 The Beginning, was initially meant to be the first movie, but the Cannon Group, the studio behind the franchise, realized that the second film, which became Missing in Action, was more compelling than the story of Braddock's years of captivity as a POW, which is why the release order was switched. This made a lot of sense as the studio was sure they'd have a huge hit with Missing in Action, then making Part 1, a prequel, would sell due to its sequel's success regardless of its quality. Code of Silence would follow in 1985, directed by Andrew Davis, who would later work with Steven Seagal in 1988's Above the Law. The two films share many similarities, and in both films, Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal play Chicago cops. In Code of Silence, Norris plays Eddie Cusack and is caught in the middle of a gang war while his own comrades shun him because he wants to take down an irresponsible cop. That's where the title comes into play, by the way, as Chuck Norris broke the Code of Silence. The film is one of Chuck Norris's standout movies from the 1980s, primarily because it marked a departure from his typical action hero roles. The film presents Norris in a more complex, nuanced character than many of his other portrayals as a one-man army or invincible soldier. Code of Silence blends action with crime drama, offering a grittier, more realistic take on the genre, while still showcasing Norris's martial arts expertise and tough guy persona, which just seems to ooze out of him, man, and audiences have loved it. One of the central themes of Code of Silence is the corruption within law enforcement and the struggle between justice and the system. Eddie Cusack operates in the world where both criminals and police officers are corrupt, and he has to decide whether to follow the rules of the department or to take matters in his own hands. His struggle with the system is a core part of his character, and it reflects the 1980s cultural anxieties about law enforcement, crime, and authority. Cusack's arc also revolves around personal redemption. His fractured relationships with his ex-wife and daughter, combined with his disillusionment with the police force, suggest that Cusack is looking for a sense of personal redemption, not just professional success. This internal struggle makes him a more relatable and human character compared to many of Norris's other roles. It should also be noted that there's a robotic sidekick in this film, which came out 2 years before RoboCop made its way to the theaters. That's something about the 80s, man, is the robots. Rocky IV had a robot. That Sylvester Stallone took out of the director's cut, by the way. This had a robot. RoboCop obviously had a robot. I remember growing up, I actually had a robot. It didn't really do that much, though. I think it was just like pick up a Coke can and that was it. Toys R Us used to sell those. I had like the little one. They had like those bigger robot too. Those were pretty expensive. But 80s were all about the robots, man. So of course Chuck Norris would have to have a robot in his movie. Following Code of Silence would be Invasion USA, a take on 1984's Red Dawn starring Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen. In Invasion USA, Chuck plays Matt Hunter, a tough, no-nonsense ex-CIA operative who takes on a brutal foreign invasion of the United States. The film is a classic example of the action genre during the height of the Cold War, combining patriotism, intense action, and a storyline about defending American soil from a violent external threat. Known for its high-octane action sequences and an almost invincible Chuck Norris at the center, Invasion USA is a quintessential one-man army film that helps solidify Norris's status as an action movie icon. Hunter is stoic, direct, and unyielding in his pursuit of justice. He's not afraid to take extreme measures when it comes to protecting American soil and neutralizing threats. He does not hesitate to kill when necessary, and his approach to dealing with terrorists is ruthless and efficient. However, there is also an underlying sense of justice and moral clarity to his character. He's not simply motivated by vengeance, but by his belief that he's defending his country from evil forces. At its core, Invasion USA is a patriotic film that highlights the importance of defending one's homeland against foreign threats. The invasion of the United States by terrorists is portrayed as a direct challenge to American freedom, values, and sovereignty. Matt Hunter is the embodiment of the American ideal, a determined and unyielding fighter who stands up against those who seek to harm the nation. I guarantee you he voted for Donald Trump, by the way. Until 2007, this was MGM's second highest selling home video title behind Gone with the Wind. Delta Force would follow in 1986. The Delta Force is one of Chuck Norris's most iconic action films, where he plays Major Scott McCoy, a tough, no-nonsense member of an elite counterterrorism unit tasked with rescuing American hostages from a hijacked airplane. Directed by Menachem Golan and produced by Cannon Group, the film capitalizes on the high-octane action that was a hallmark of 1980s action cinema. It's a tale of military precision, heroism, and patriotism, with Chuck Norris at the forefront as a man who is capable of taking on impossible odds. We all expect nothing less of Chuck. The movie was inspired by the real-life hijacking of TWA Flight 847, which even with the over-the-top elements of the movie, adds an interesting aspect to it all. It's also notable that this film is the final film for actor Lee Marvin. The action sequences in the Delta Force are intense and thrilling, with a heavy emphasis on military combat and high-stakes rescue operations. While the film contains the usual 1980s action movie staples, explosions, gunfights, and hand-to-hand combat, its focus is on portraying the tactical operations of an elite military team. So that's part 2 of how Chuck Norris dominated the 1980s, but this is a 3-part series, and we're going to round off the decade with a lot of amazing stuff. With Chuck Norris, expect no less.